Hello, I'm Edward October. Over the years, I've narrated more ghost stories, horror shows, and creepypastas than I can count. And yet, the crimes discussed on our true crime podcast managed to scare the shit out of me. This program is not suitable for children or the faint of heart. If you are such a person, go ahead and switch off this podcast. Listen to something else. Are you still with us? Well, we've warned you.
Hey, Jen.
Hey, Cam, how are you doing?
I'm pretty darn okay. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Hot. It's Missouri. It's hot.
Dog days of summer. It is, but we'll survive.
I like it. So,
anyway, yep. I was going to say.
Yep. Mm-hmm,
yep. Mm-hmm. What you got for us?
I got a case for us. Okay, so today's crime takes us to Marietta, Georgia. And Jen, there's a book written on this case. And actually, it was one of the very first true crime books I had read. And, it's always stuck with me. And after I tell you the story, I'm sure it will stick with you, too. We were just kind of coming into our own. We were 22 years old when this happened. And it was one of the big cases where I think at that age, you're kind of realizing that, wow, there really are some people out there that are not nice. There's true badness in the world. That's exactly this person right here. So the name of the book is Secrets Never Lie, The Death of Sara Tokers, A Southern Tragedy of Money, Murder, and Innocence Betrayed by R. Robin McDonald. So here we go. It is November 29th, 1992, and Thanksgiving weekend had just wrapped up. 39-year-old Sara had been visiting with her parents and her sisters in Bradenton, Florida for the holiday weekend. But it was time for her and her two young boys, 6-year-old Ricky and 4-year-old Mike, to load up the Toyota SUV to make the 9-hour trek back home to Marietta, Georgia. Marietta, Georgia is an affluent suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, which you have been to, Jen, and I have not.
Oh, yeah. I travel through Georgia all the time.
After the three had departed, Sarah's husband, Fred, called the parents home to inquire if they were on the road yet. Now, Fred, who had been there earlier, had departed because he had a meeting with the client that he just couldn't miss. Sarah's father, Dr. John Ambrusko, had answered the call from Fred and told Fred that they had actually just departed about 15 minutes earlier. The father then told him that this should place Sara and the boys home between 9:30 and 10 o'clock that night. It was almost 10 p.m. when Sara and the boys pulled into the garage. Sara started to unload the car as one of the boys had fallen asleep in his car seat. So as she would often do, she would go ahead, the dog, and the oldest child would get out of the car. She'd get them situated in the house, then come back out to the garage and get the sleeping younger child. So as she was getting unloaded, a strange man came out of the darkness. The man, who was carrying a sawed-off shotgun, forced Sara and little Ricky back into the car. The stranger ordered Sara to get back on the road and make a right turn. Sara told the man there was a dead-end street. So Sara pulled over right before that turn would happen. Not following his instructions, he became very violent and angry. He takes out the shotgun and shoots Sara in the back of the head. As the Toyota begins to roll forward, the gunman jumps out, leaving Sara and her two little boys in the moving vehicle. The Toyota traveled for several yards into an empty field where it came to a stop. Little Ricky reached over his mother, who was now dead, to get the car key out and turn off the car. He knew that. That sweet little boy had remembered what his mother had instilled in him. Her voice ran through his head, never leave a car running. Ricky unbuckled his little brother, and the two of them started to walk towards some lights. The little boys knocked on the door and told the homeowners that their mom had been hurt really badly. They called the police, who arrived within minutes. Detective Pat Banks was first on the scene. He approached the vehicle and located Sara inside. There were no signs of life. An ambulance had been called to the scene. The two boys were being treated for shock. Each of the boys were spattered with their mother's blood on them. The youngest had vomited on himself, and the responders were trying to get him cleaned up. They were trying desperately to comfort the children. Detectives called Fred Tokers, who was still in Alabama with a client that he had to meet, to inform him about the tragedy. Fred told authorities that his brother would come and get the children and care for them until he could get home. Police go into the Tokers' home to search it. As they get inside, they immediately notice that it had been burglarized, but upon closer inspection, something was off. While it looked like some drawers had been ransacked, nothing of importance was missing. It looked like it was a staged crime scene. Also of interest, the home alarm had been turned off, and the back sliding door was slightly ajar. The door's lock had been broken. This was the point of entry. It was now clear that Sara was the target. The burglary was a ruse, but who would want Sara dead? It all started off so well, something that you'd almost hear about in a movie, or a Hallmark movie at that. Sara was watching TV one night when she saw a young, handsome junior prosecutor being interviewed regarding a murder trial he was working on. The man's name was Frederick Tokers, and she was immediately smitten. 31-year-old Sara was working as a marketing director at the time, living with her sister Chrissy, and she thought, hey, why not? And she called up the attorney out of the blue. You go, girl. As the two chatted, a date was set up. The courtship was quick, and just a year later, the two would wed. Now, Sara had been married before to an Atlanta businessman, but that businessman had a wandering eye, which led to the marriage breakup. Sara took the divorce hard. She'd always looked up to her parents as having the ideal home life, and she wanted to replicate that sort of life. Sara was the middle child in a family of 7 girls. 7 girls! I would love that. The daughters were all raised Catholic by their mother and their father. She desperately wanted to emulate that life. She wanted to be a wife, a mother, and do all the things that she saw while she was growing up. In Fred Tokers, she saw a future. Now, Tokers worked in the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. He wore those tortoiseshell glasses that were so popular in the 80s and 90s, the big round ones. We had a good friend in high school that wore those. You know the ones.
I do.
He was working as an accountant, and he had put himself through law school at night. Tokers was a go-getter. He was very ambitious, and he was always able to talk his way into any position he desired. He was a talker. We know the type, don't we now? He'd inch his way in there to say whatever he needed to say to get what he wanted. His coworkers dubbed him Fast Fred for the multitude of things, such as his blatant self-promotion, his adaptability to take over a project when it interested him, his love of the nightlife, and his love of women. Tokers would regale people with the stories of the cases he worked on and how he was making a difference. Sara, who grew up a rather sheltered life, but in a good way, was drawn into his stories. Tokers wanted to get into politics, and he wanted to be rich. Sara, on his arm, was the perfect accessory. She was blonde, outgoing, and talkative. It seemed to him she was just the thing he needed to round out his life, while for Sara, really what she wanted was love and a good life. As their marriage kicked off, it was not quite what Sara had envisioned. Fred worked a lot of hours and was often not home, which is pretty normal with a person that's trying to advance their law career. Friends and family would say that Sara did seem happy, which is what mattered, albeit she was lonely. The loneliness would not last long, as Sara became pregnant within 5 months of starting the marriage. Ricky was about to make his debut. With the growing family, the couple upgraded to Kings Cove, which was an exclusive community near the Atlanta Country Club. After Ricky was born in 1986, Sara really wanted to stay at home with him, but Fred would not allow that. Always the one to smooth things over, she struck a happy medium and split the workday at the office and at home. This setup worked for a while, but when Sara was laid off, her dream of becoming a stay-at-home mom came true. It was a bit after this that Fred left the DA's office to begin his own practice, where he would focus on being a defense attorney. Now, as his practice grew, he added tax fraud and divorce lawyering to his resume. Now, this was a little awkward for Sara because, when she had met Fred, he was originally a prosecutor, and now he's going to be a defense attorney. Instead of prosecuting the bad guys, he's now going to be defending them, and that means hanging out with them.
Hanging out with them?
Yeah, the bad guys. Other changes occurred too. Money was tight, and Fred decided that he would now handle all of the expenses. That's right, all of the money. Sara was not allowed to have her own money. No credit cards. In fact, every cent she spent, Fred needed to know where it was, where it went.
Don't like it. Don't like that at all.
Fred put her on an allowance. Fred wouldn't even let her buy much at all, and all the things had to be paid in cash. He also mentioned a little something about his office in the basement. Yeah, she was not allowed to ever go in there. Fred told Sara that his locked filing cabinet had files of sensitive information and of a sensitive nature, and she must not ever go look into them. Mm-hmm. Which, to me and you, would mean one thing.
Mm-hmm.
No,
Red flag.
I'm hightailing it down to the basement and I'm opening it up. I'm not calling you to come over and go through it with me. However, the marriage was still new, and Sara really, really wanted to make this work. You know, she had already had one failed marriage behind her. She didn't want two. Sara would get credit cards in her name, but with no income coming in, they weren't of much use. The demands continued and tightened. Fred always knew how close Sara was to her family. So when he started griping about that, well, that was not good. When Sara would not listen and insist on going to see her family, Fred refused to give her any money to do so. So he's not going to give her any money to take their baby on a road trip to go see her family. Okay.
I believe that's called economic abuse. Isn't
I
that
believe
what
it is.
Or financial abuse or something like that. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Now, still stranger to me, and I'm sure you and all our listeners, is that sometimes Fred would go with Sara to Florida to visit her family. Well, I guess with is the wrong word, since he would often fly there and back while Sara was forced to drive with the two small kids by herself. Yeah, no. It got even worse. Fred started hitting Sara. Sara was desperate and she was looking for help. Of course, Fred would deny this, but Sara had told a few people after it happened, like her sisters, who of course believed her. Even though the marriage was not good, Sara wanted Ricky to have a sibling. And in 1988, Sara gave birth to Michael, little Mike. It was probably foresight on Sara's behalf. It was just 4 months later that Sara wrote her own will and had two people witness it, sign it, and have it notarized. Now, the important takeaways mentioned in the will were these, Jen. All prior wills were to be void. All her property was left to her two sons. Her sister, a lawyer, would be the executor of the will and the boy's trustee. Her younger sister would be the children's legal guardian, quote, if my husband does not survive me, end quote. Pretty telling right there, sadly. It was clear that the marriage was not a happy one. It was a worrisome one. It was so obvious that Sara was worried for her life and she was worried for the boys. Now, this may be because Fred had taken out, you ready? 3 life insurance policies out on Sara, who's in her late 30s, mind you. He would be the beneficiary. The total was $1.75 million, which in today's standards is a lot, but that was then. So that today would be $3.7 million. Now, at this point in the marriage, Fred was hardly coming home at all. Starting to get a little worried about what exactly was happening, Sara sought advice from a divorce lawyer who would tell Sara that, you know what, you need to be worried for yourself, but probably even more so for your boys. Fred would often threaten Sara that if she divorced him, he would take the children. Full custody. Mm-hmm. Now getting desperate, Sara hired a private investigator named Ralph Perdomo. He was able to confirm what Sara had long suspected. Her husband was being unfaithful in the marriage. But that was not all. Sara, you go girl, she did go into that basement and she was able to get into those secret files. She discovered something that she thought would help her keep those boys when she left Fred. She called the private investigator and asked him to come to the house. She wanted to show him, and I'm guessing also have a witness to what she had found. Once at the house, Sara and the PI went to the basement and they opened that lock safe. Inside, there were lots and lots of documents about things, which we'll get into in a minute. There also happened to be some vials of medication. Sara asked the PI to take the docs to examine them, but he told her that that would be illegal, and he declined. He did tell her that she should make copies secretly and give the copies to someone close to her, someone she trusts. If this would just scare me. In what is now haunting foreshadowing, Sara asked the private investigator to report all of this to the police should anything happen to her. A little side note here, just because we're getting to know Fred's personality so well. When the PI came to the house to look at what he was hiding in the basement, he recalled that Sara profusely apologized for the broken air conditioner and explained that her husband had refused to give her the money to get it fixed, and it had been broken for long over a month. Mind you, this is August in Atlanta, which is very, very hot if people out there aren't sure, not from these parts.
So not only is he being mean to his wife, he's also being horrible to his children.
Diapers.
Yes.
And diapers, and how hot that is.
And humid. Yeah.
At this point in his career, Fred was not just defending, how shall I say, the seedier people, big-time drug dealers, tax evaders, you know the type. He was not only defending them in court, he was also getting involved in some shady business dealings with them. So this is what I meant when he started hanging out with them. Not only defending them, but hanging out with them. And, all of this would come out should a divorce happen. And with the divorce, as you know, finances are gone over, people that you hang out with. All of this would become public knowledge. And, well, Fred, he cannot have that.
He's got to save face.
What Sara did not know yet was that the federal government had already caught wind of Fred and his questionable work friends. They had been snooping around to see what they could find. So it wasn't just her and the PI. It was the federal government. So sooner or later, he was going to be taken down anyway. 3 weeks before Sara's death, federal agents were investigating allegations of drug trafficking and money laundering linked to Fred's clients and associates. They subpoenaed a female companion of Anthony Brown. Now, Brown was suspected of overseeing a cocaine distribution ring. So that kind of just gets you to know he might be a highfalutin defense attorney, but these are his people he's hanging out with.
Birds of a feather.
Due to all this going on, and Sara, she knew the background of what she knew, finding those documents, but she also knew the kind of people that he was hanging out with. Sara begged Fred to install a security system since his clientele was just a little bit shady. And then also there's that backsliding door that had been broken, which Fred refused to fix. Of course he would not fix it, even though his wife and 2 young boys were at home at night, often all alone. Just as she worried about it, it happened. It was right before Thanksgiving when 2 men entered the home through that broken door. Sara and the boys were sound asleep in their beds. Conveniently, and I know you're going to be shocked here, Fred's not home. Nope, just his wife and the 2 young boys. Thankfully, the family dog, Jake, began barking, and this was enough to frighten the men away, for now. 2 days before Thanksgiving, Sara and the boys departed for her parents' home in Florida. While en route, she made a stop at the Tampa airport to pick up her husband, who had flown down from Atlanta. On Saturday of Thanksgiving weekend, shortly after 1 a.m., the security company monitoring the Tokers' residence contacted them. An alarm had been triggered at their house in Kings Cove, but upon investigation, nothing was found. 6 hours later, the security company called again. Another alarm had been activated at the house. Later, there would be debate as to who told the security company to disarm the system for the remainder of the weekend. Fred, of course, would claim it was Sara and not him who told the company to disarm the system. You can see where this is going. In the morning, Fred left and made his way to a meeting he was having with an inmate for a possible client. Sara and the boys stayed behind at her parents' home. Sara told Fred that they'd be home soon. By 11 a.m., Fred was in Atlanta, where he called his partner, Lawrence, and informed him that the water heater was broken at his house. And could he, go fix it for him? Lawrence said, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. I'm not going to go fix your water heater. That's not going to happen. Around 12:45, Sara packed up the car and the kids and departed for home. John, Sara's father, answered the phone right around 1 o'clock. It was Fred who wanted to know when Sara and the boys had left. And John told them it was about 15 minutes ago and they should be home between 9:30 and 10. Now, Lawrence would later say that Fred called him to inform him, hey, I found someone to fix the water heater. He was going to go ahead and go about his day because he had a meeting with an inmate. And if you can't see all this, this is the lining up the alibis, saying where you are and what's going on. See what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Sara was always really good about calling her parents when she arrived home safely. When the time came and went, and a call should have been placed, her father decided to call her, but heard a busy signal. They kept on trying, but the line continued to stay busy. When they contacted the phone company, they were informed that the phone had been taken off the hook. This was not a good sign. Now, all of this brings us up to where I started the episode, and we're going to get into exactly more of what happened. So like I said, it was just after 10 p.m. when Sara and the children pulled into the garage. Mike, the youngest, was asleep in the back seat, and Sara left him sleeping there, while Rick and Jake, the dog, exited the car. Suddenly, there he was, an agitated man wearing a knit cap. In his hands, he had a sawed-off shotgun. It was Curtis Rower. She knew him. Curtis Alfonso Rower, known as Cornbread among his College Park acquaintances, was a 22-year-old with a history of minor offenses. He was on probation for car theft, but he had never been involved in murder before. Curtis was familiar with the home and the layout because, after all, he had been there before, Jen. That's right. In fact, it was Curtis who broke into the home earlier through that back broken sliding glass door and left when the dog started barking. Curtis wasn't there for money or for drugs, but what he was there for was murder. And on that night, that first night, he failed. Now, Curtis claimed that Eddie Lawrence, and that's Tokers' business partner that I talked about above, was with him that night that they broke in the house. He also would say that Lawrence is the one who promised him $5,000 to kill Sara. $5,000.
$5,000. That's it.
Fred was called by police shortly after midnight to deliver the worst news, and that was that his wife had been murdered. Tokers, police would later say, was hysterical when he received the news. He is quite the good actor, and we'll talk about that in a minute, too.
You kind of have to be to pull this off.
As we all know, and if the podcast has taught us anything, Jen, the way people act illustrate more than what they actually say. Just days after Sara's tragic death, her family gathered to honor her memory and to deal with the devastating events that had unfolded. Sara's parents and her sisters attended, each of them having already spoken with police, eager to assist in any way possible. However, one person stood out for being, let's say, not very cooperative. That would be Fred. Despite repeated attempts by the police to get him to come in for questioning at the station, it just appeared that he was just so busy. He was just so busy with jobs, busy with clients. He was just too occupied to make time to come in and talk about his wife's murder.
Well, yeah.
On December 3rd, loved ones attended Sara's funeral. At this point, Fred still had not spoken to the police. If that doesn't say guilty, I don't know what does. Sara's family was growing weary of Fred and his strange behavior. Sara's sister Gretchen was after Fred to get an answer about all of this. Fred told Gretchen that in his line of work, he's done some questionable things. He admitted taking money from some of the more unscrupulous clients and, well, never paid tax on it. He was afraid that if the police looked into that, he would be in a wee bit of trouble. While in police custody, more details came to light. Curtis Rower would explain that once he was in the vehicle with Sara, he began to panic. He could not find Lawrence. Lawrence was with them again that night. So he was panicking, and he thought Lawrence bailed on him, that Lawrence had chickened out and left him all alone to do this murder by himself. Not sure what to do, and realizing in the midst of all of this going on that he still hasn't been paid for the murder. So he starts to think, what am I doing? He told Sara to take him to a nearby housing project. But then he changed his mind about a half mile into the drive. And this is when he ordered Sara to pull off in a cul-de-sac. But Sara pulled over to the side of the road instead. At this point, little Mike had woken up and started to tug at Curtis's shirt. I cannot imagine this. But Curtis knew better. He was threatened not to harm or hurt the boys, no matter what happened. Sara, at this point, was begging the man to leave them alone. Take her purse, take the car, take anything but let them go. As all this was taking place, Curtis sees a car parked nearby. it was Lawrence, who then pulled up alongside of them. A shot rang out and hit Sara in the back of the head. The car, which was still running, rolled off the road and into the field. Curtis jumped out and ran. Less than 3 weeks after Sara's murder, police apprehended Lawrence. It seems that an informant had came forward and told police that Lawrence had been asking around about hiring a hitman to take someone out. It also seemed that Fred had loaned him, somewhere in the neighborhood of $70,000, and their jointly owned businesses were at this time experiencing some financial difficulty. Just about a week later, a man came into the Cobb County Police Station to tell them that he was currently the boyfriend of Curtis's sister and that Lawrence had approached him and offered him $5,000 to kill Sara. But he said he declined. However, we now know that Curtis did not decline, and he did go through with it and kill Sara. On December 23rd, police went to a house where Curtis was hiding and was arrested for the murder of Sara. It took just 12 hours for Curtis to admit he did it. But, of course, Jen, he didn't mean to. He didn't mean to kill her. He didn't mean to hold the shotgun up to the back of her head and one shot rang out in front of her 2 young boys who were left in the car to witness all of this.
He didn't mean that at all. He didn't mean to leave them all alone.
The day after Curtis was arrested, Fred Tokers would make an unsuccessful suicide attempt on Christmas Eve. He wrote a note as well. And normally I would not share this, but this just goes into the mind of him. And notice his wording. Dear Rick, Mike, Norma, Andy, and friends and family, I am sorry for the pain and sorrow my lifestyle has inflicted upon you. I never wanted Sara or anybody to die or get hurt. I am a weak person and I cannot stand the pain and sorrow any longer, so I want to end it. Last night I was asked, quote, how could you work with anyone who could do this, end quote, and I had no answer. Please make sure my little Mike and Rick are taken care of. I love them so much. So did little Sara. Andy and Mother Norma are the only 2 people who stood by my side to the very end. Without them, I would have died a long time ago. I took the lie detector test only because I knew that I was innocent. Ever since I took it, I wanted to die. There's just too much pain for me, even though I passed. Yesterday, little Ricky asked me who was the best person in Mom's family. I hesitated, and he said Joni. I want Joni to take care of Rick and Mike. I want Andy to take care of my money for the education of all the Tokers and Ambrusko children. Please make sure all the children have a chance to go to college. I want Andy to replace me as the trustee for my mother because he is so strong and honest. He'll be very good at that. I ask that all of my and Sara's money go to a college fund for the Tokers and Ambrusko Willox kids. I also want to keep our house in Canada as it's my real beginning. Mike, Rick, Sara, and the Willoxes love it. Please try to keep it for them, as there is nothing like it left. Please call Bob Brenner and tell him that I love him and I've always admired him. Whale and Neil and Okie were also the best friends in the world. I'm sorry for not spending enough time with them. I just worked too hard. Sara really loved Xmas, so do what you need to do to make everyone happy. She really was very special to me. Sar won't ever know. I know your loss was bad, but mine was really worse. Every day I felt like I was going to die without her. She was always great with, everybody. The real pain comes from trying to help, ? The miserable defend myself. There are people all over Atlanta you know and love me. They know I would never hurt anybody.
He never hurt anybody, but he hired somebody else to hurt somebody.
I really had it made, and I can't explain to you how hard it was to lose everything in one day. Let that sink in. Mike and Rick have been sheltered from the press so far. Let them see everything and draw their own conclusions. They will see I could never hurt Sara or anyone else. The press killed me. Please explain to my friends my weakness and let them know what happened. I can't live with all this pressure. I'm sorry for all the pain and suffering that I've caused everyone. But I loved Sara, never hurt her, and I have now died for her. I love you, Sara, Rick, Mike. Give my judge's badge to little Ricky. Give my DA's badge to little Michael. Make sure they know how hard I work for them both. The press has made me feel like a suspect. I shouldn't be. The torture has weakened me to the point where I can't take it anymore. I want to die. I'm very sad. Please help my children, Norma, Andy, and my family. Now, reading all of that, it's everybody else's fault but his. Everybody else's fault.
Oh, yeah.
Fred Tokers was unconscious when they discovered him. His lawyer would later explain it away by saying, he just lost his wife and was being scrutinized by the media and the public. He was, you see, under a lot of pressure. Now, Jen, like I said earlier, we were just 22 years old when this happened. But, it's always stuck with me. And this is why. This is the main reason why. His press conference. And I will never forget this. So he held a big press conference. At 22, I knew not only was this man guilty, but he wasn't sorry for anything except the life he lost, that his big, rich, fancy life of politics and money and hustling and women, it was over. It all came to an end. Now, I'm going to try to find that press conference. I looked for it. I found snippets, but you really need to see the whole thing, let me tell you. So if I find it, I will put it in the show notes. But let me just leave you with this. One of the standout comments was that in his press conference, he did this. He begged people to leave him alone because this whole thing had cost him my whole lifestyle. Never said anything about Sarah. He said his whole lifestyle was run. And I remember being a kid, 22. To me, that's a kid. And I was like, wow, he's bad. Like, I can tell he's lying. And I'm like, 22-year-old kid.
Yeah, he was a piece of shit.
Just days after this press conference, and if I remember correctly, it was held in his front yard. And just not a tear shed, nothing. Just he's upset that this whole thing cost him his lifestyle. So just days after this press conference, as if he's a kid graduating from college and moving on, he began tossing things. He put the house on the market, he closed his law practice, and hightailed it to West Palm Beach to move in with his mother. It took a little time, but they got him. Finally, they had enough to charge Fred Tokers for the murder of his wife, Sarah. Now, Curtis would avoid the death penalty solely because his lawyer contended that Fred's business partner, Lawrence, was actually there in the car or near the car, and maybe he was the one that pulled the trigger. So that alone saved Curtis from the old death penalty. However, cute little Ricky, the oldest boy, would testify, and that little cutie pie up on the stand, heartbreaking. He was steadfast throughout his hours of emotionally intense testimony. He consistently testified that he had seen only one man before, during, and after his mother's murder in or around that van, and that man was Curtis Rower. Now, for about 7 months, Eddie Lawrence denied any involvement in the murder, either by himself or with Fred Tokers. But wouldn't you know, Jen, I'll tell you, but a plea agreement changed all that. Isn't that funny how that works? You get a plea agreement, right, instead of serving life? And this is a pretty cush deal that little Eddie Lawrence got. Eddie Lawrence claimed that Fred Tokers had offered him $25,000 in cash and a $910,000, that's right, $910,000, almost $1 million, investment in their joint business to arrange the murder of Sarah. Now, let me just say this. Let me just back up. And I didn't write this, but if that's true, and then he only gave that 22-year-old kid $5,000 and he got all that, that's unreal. Eddie Lawrence subsequently pleaded guilty to federal charges of counterfeiting and aiding and abetting in the murder, as well as state charges of murder. Now, here's the deal. As part of the agreement, he would serve only 12 and a half years in federal custody. And Fed prisons are much better than the other prisons. And after that, when he got out in 12 and a half years, he was placed in the Federal Witness Protection Program. I'm not sure who he thought was going to come get him. Probably lots of people. Despite the rather easy sentence for Eddie Lawrence, who was there both times, apparently, the first failed attempt to kill Sarah and then the second successful one, the Cobb County District Attorney Tom Sharon sought the death penalty for Fred Tokers. However, the jury ultimately sentenced him to life in prison in 1997, which is just really par on course for this fella. In a of course he did moment, Fred decided to be a jailhouse informant while in prison, and he'd rat out people with the hopes of getting his sentence reduced. Now, he did rat out a lot of people and got a lot of people in trouble. He also practiced a little law on the side in there for them, but his sentence was never reduced. His attorney would later say that it should have been reduced because he did what he said he would do.
He still is responsible for the death of someone. So,
I know.
Yeah.
In May of 2020, Fred Tokers, age 67, died of natural causes in prison while serving out his life sentence. He had been dealing with some sort of sickness for 10 years, and I guess
MS. I just looked him up. Mm-hmm.
Yep, not good. Now, in some sad news, Ricky grew up to be an EMT. Now, Mike was a journalist who had long struggled with depression for years before he died at only 31 years old from a pulmonary embolism.
Mm-hmm. He died a month before Fred did.
Sure did.
Mm-hmm.
Family members of Sara say that they're not saddened at Fred's death. Quote, "He should have died in the electric chair 28 years ago," Sara's sister Joni told the journal Constitution. "The pain and suffering that he caused those little boys and our family was and continues to be immeasurable." That's the story of Fred. And so you looked him up, right? You remember seeing him? He's huge.
To me, he always had the Ramirez look to him. There's just always something about him that reminded me of Richard Ramirez. Maybe it's the hair, the dark, out of control hair. He had very gaunt features.
Yeah.
Very bony face. Yeah, and the thing that I read said he developed a fever. Died after developing a fever last week. Kind of wondered if it was pandemic related.
Yeah, it could be. And then also, I think in prison, I don't think they're not going to do a lot of stuff to help you. You don't want to get sick in prison is my point, is what I'm saying. I don't know. And like I said, I just those little sweet boys, their faces, I don't know. It's just certain cases always stayed with me. And just, Sara wanting it to work out so badly because she came from such a good home, and her trying to do the right thing cost her life. And he was willing to continue to do illegal things, counterfeiting, all that stuff.
What always stuck in my head was she was so much cuter than him.
Oh, yeah, totally.
They were like the weirdest couple, the odd couple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am a little hesitant, and I don't know. I just read something earlier that the surviving son wrote an essay for a newspaper about their life and how this affected them. And after it was out for a while, he called and asked them to take it down. So hopefully episode doesn't meet that same thing. You know what I'm saying? I mean, he wrote it, so I'm guessing maybe it was just too hard for family members and stuff to read it. But I just always thought about that sweet little boy knowing I got to turn off the car before me and my little brother get out, That's just, and seeing their mother, like you don't get over that. And I know the one struggled with PTSD and depression and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Wouldn't you?
Would have to.
I mean, yeah. If I'm correct, it was like a white SUV, correct?
It's a Toyota SUV, I believe.
Yeah, but it was white. I believe it was white because I can still see it in my head, and I can see the news reports in my head. Because that's what was shocking. The mom was found with a gunshot wound, and the two little boys were in the car.
Well, they got out of the car, went to the neighbor's house, and knocked on the door and said, "Mommy got hurt really badly." But
what I'm saying is that the mother was dead, and the two little boys were left in the car to fend for their own. This is what,
He purposely didn't get that back door fixed because that was their point of entry. That's how they got in the house. So going back to the first murder attempt, so they're going to break in, they're going to kill Sara while she slept, and then those two boys are going to be left alone in the house to wake up and find their mom. Mm-hmm. That's he
didn't care about the boys. That's the whole thing.
Level of evil. He did not. It was a postcard for his politics career. That's it. So like I said, the book, there's a lot more to this. There's just a lot, as you can see. But, I didn't want it to be 5 days long, so I had to cut it. But just like the shenanigans he got up to and things, and just awful. And I know, and I cannot remember for the life of me, but maybe our listeners will. Earlier, I did an episode, and Fred was in the same prison with that guy. And when I did the episode, I mentioned Fred Tokers was in prison. Of course, I can't remember what that was, but it wasn't that long ago that they were in the same prison.
Lord knows I won't remember.
Yeah.
I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday. So there you go.
Mm-hmm. But I will try to put the press conference. It's just, and he was just so mad that his all ripped out from underneath him. His lifestyle.
Yeah.
Oh, terrible. Anyway, do we have anything we need to tell people?
We do have something. We have been asked if we can open up some seats for our trip to the UK next June, the 13th through the 22nd. So if you are interested in going in our trip, we have seats available. You can start booking. It's going to be fun.
We did kind of just because people had reached out to us. And ideally I said that we capped it off because we wanted to keep it small, but then we felt really badly saying, no, you can't go.
It's hard to turn people away when they want to come.
So we were like, okay.
But it's going to be fun. We're going to start off in Scotland and Edinburgh, and then we'll spend a couple days there. Then we're going to go to York, and then we're going to go to London. And everything is included in the price. You get the plane ride. You will get picked up from the airport and taken to the hotel where you will see Cam and I. For the next 10 days, you are going to see Cam and I because we're not going to leave your side.
Sorry.
You're going to get so sick of us.
We're going to be like, hey, where's
We're going to be besties, and we'll be doing each other's hair by the time the whole trip's done. But we're going to go Edinburgh, see everything. It's dark history tour, so we're going to see all the crime, all the good stuff, going to the underground city, ghost tours. Then we're going to go to York, where there's going to be more ghost tours. Stay there, I think, overnight or two.
Equal nights in each city, if I'm not mistaken.
And then we head on down to London. We'll go see the
London.
Tower. I always want to say the Tower of Terror, but that's Disney World. Tower of London, all the ravens that come and go. It's going to be a great time. You're going to be with us 24/7, and it's just going to be fun. And then you'll get the plane ride home. There's going to be breakfasts every day. There's going to be a mystery theater type thing. Everything's included. I mean, there might be
come with your
dinners
suitcase
and some lunches that you'll have to pay for yourself, but otherwise, that's pretty easy stuff. Otherwise, everything else is taken care of.
Come with yourself and a suitcase and money for souvenirs. And that's about it.
Yeah. And we'll provide the fun along with you. So, going to be a good time. You can go to our webpage, and there will be a link. That's ourtruecrimepodcast.com. And where you can go and book. If not, you can just reach out to me at ourtruecrimepodcast@gmail.com and say, hey, I want to book. What do I do? We'll tell you where to go.
Oh,
but
my gosh.
We only have like 6 more seats. Tops.
Oh, that's more than I thought. Okay.
Mm-hmm. It's the final hurrah. And if we don't fill them, we don't fill them. But we are already sold out, but
Just new friends for us to make, Jen.
I know.
New friends for us all to be besties.
New opportunities. And we also need to decide where we're going to go in 2026.
So if you guys have lead into that. I was going to say, hopefully, we want to make this a yearly thing, and that the group of us and our besties go.
Yeah. So decide what you want to do. We could take a cruise. We have to figure out how to do that because the tour group that we're using now doesn't really go to like Mexico or anything like that. But they do cruise to like Alaska. Or to Venice. You go to Venice and then you cruise around the Greek islands.
Beach, California?
Yeah, exactly. Venice, Italy. And then there's all different kinds of cruises there to do. Or we could go to Australia. We could just go to Hawaii. We have the entire world to travel. Help us start thinking where we can go in 2026.
All right. So until next week, everybody, we will see you at the same time. Same place, all that good stuff. That's right. Remember, lock your doors.
And keep passing by those open windows.
Bye-bye.
Love ya.
Today's episode was researched and written by me, Cam. For more information about this episode, as well as all the sources I used, please check out our show notes or the podcast website at ourtruecrimepodcast.com. Our True Crime Podcast is developed and created by hosts Jen and Cam. Original music and audio mix of all our True Crime Podcast episodes is courtesy of Nico Bertese from We Talk of Dreams. Listener discretion is provided by Edward October from October Pod VHS. Our True Crime Podcast is executive produced by Nico Bertese and Dick Vane. Make sure to like and subscribe to Our True Crime Podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. We can be reached on Instagram and Facebook at Our True Crime Podcast or on Twitter at Our True Crime Pod. You can email us at ourtruecrimepodcast@gmail.com. If you really like the show, make sure to check out our Patreon at Our True Crime Podcast. Our True Crime Podcast is an OTC production.